Good evening, everybody. Thanks so much for coming tonight. I'm Nick Neely, an assistant professor of English writing at Eastern Oregon University. Welcome to this Sandra and Carl Elston Ars Poetica Fun reading and conversation featuring essayist Marco Wilkinson and his debut book, Matter, a memoir in weeds, which I'll hold up. Beautiful cover. As people settle in, I'm just going to drop a few links into the chat. We're really excited, which I always forget to expand before I try to do this. We're really excited for our next Ars Poetica event 2, which is in 3 weeks' time. It's actually going to be a coffee house press month. We have Allison Adele Hedge Koch, whose new book, Look at This Blue, excuse me, is just out. It's a full-length, an epic poem, a love song to California. And one of our MFA faculty members, Abigail Shabitnoy, is going to talk to her about that on the 28th. So we'll hope you'll come back and Zoom with us again then. I'm gonna, you can always find announcements about future Ars Poetica events at our Visiting Writers page. Follow us on YouTube to see recordings of events after the fact, and give us a follow on Twitter too if you don't already, so that you can stay up to date on all that's happening here at EOU, MFA, and English writing programs. I also want to drop in a link to Marco's book, Matter, so you can purchase that. Oops, I'm just sharing this with the panelists, aren't I? I'll have to do it all over again.
Oh no.
Check that out. It's a beautiful book. I hope you'll pick it up from your local independent bookstore, from Coffee House directly, bookshop.org, those sorts of things. Here's the next event. Thanks for bearing with me. Now that all that's out of the way, as we begin, I'd like to just offer a brief land acknowledgement. Since many of us are in La Grande, where EOU is sited, we humbly acknowledge the original inhabitants of the land Eastern Oregon University is upon, the Cayuse, Umatilla, Walla Walla, and Nez Perce people. We celebrate their traditions, languages, and stories. We acknowledge their continuing connection to this land, water, and community, and pay our respects to these original stewards of Northeastern Oregon. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to briefly introduce Marco and Matter. He's going to then read for 15 or 20 minutes, and then I have some questions for him. And we hope between his reading and our conversation that you'll be inspired. You'll have some questions too, and please drop those into the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen at any point, and we'll get to them. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Marco Wilkinson. He has been a horticulturist, a farmer, and an editor. He's taught literature and creative writing at Oberlin College, University of California, San Diego, James Madison University, and Antioch University's MFA program. He's also taught horticulture and sustainable agriculture at Lorain County Community College and Mira Costa College. He's been the recipient of an Ohio Arts Council Award for Individual Excellence, fellowships from the Hemera Foundation, Craig Garden, if I'm saying that correctly, excuse me, and the Breadloaf Environmental Writers Conference. His essays have appeared in journals such as Kenyon Review, Seneca Review, and the Bennington Review. He's also the nonfiction editor of the Los Angeles Review. Matter is his first book, and here's how Coffee House Press describes it. Quote, "My life, these weeds," end quote. In Matter, Marco Wilkinson uses his deep knowledge of undervalued plants, mainly weeds, invisible yet ubiquitous, unwanted yet abundant, out of place yet flourishing, as both structure and metaphor in these intimate vignettes. Matter combines poetic meditations on nature, immigration, queer sensuality, and willful forgetting with recollections of Wilkinson's Rhode Island childhood and glimpses of his maternal family's life in Uruguay. The son of a fierce, hardworking mother who tried to erase even the memory of his absent father from their lives. Wilkinson investigates his heritage with a mixture of anger and empathy as he wrestles with the ambiguity of his own history. Using a verdant iconography rich with wordplay and symbolism, Wilkinson offers a mesmerizing portrait of cultivating belonging in an uprooted world. Marco, it's so good to have you with us tonight. Thank you for being here, and please take it away.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nick, for inviting me and having me join your community for the evening. As Nick mentioned in that description just now, this book is is really an exploration of having been raised by a single mom after my father left shortly after I was born, and raised by a mom who decided that not only had my father left physically, but he would be excised utterly, from our lives, and that his existence would be denied completely. And so this book is about kind of reckoning with what that means for me, and it reckons with and it uses the kind of central metaphor of weeds, these plants that are everywhere but invisible, that are kind of always underfoot and out of place, and what it meant to be the child of a single mom, to be a weed sort of in the garden of our family, and in the world at large. So I'm going to read to you some excerpts from the opening of the book, and then I'm going to skip way towards the end and read a later section. So the book is organized primarily through kind of three main sections that I would call kind of mother essays that deal with kind of my mother's childhood, my childhood, into young adulthood. And then those are interspersed with what I would call kind of father sections, all of which are always bracketed. And these are sections that are grappling with fathers, real and imagined and substituted. And so I'm going to read to you from one of those father substitution sort of chapters. So to start with, though, I'll read from the introduction, which is called Weeds, This Semblance. I am a gardener, this birthright from grandmother and mother and aunt passed down and diagonally to me. A stolen bit of history, inútil, this useless love. For much of my adult life, I've worked my hands through plant leaves and plant roots, worked my mind through folklore and Latin names, soil and air, worked myself into this semblance of a garden, staving off the weeds. But the more I garden, the less I weed. Burdocks root reaches too deep. Matter runs riot through the back places. Shepherd's purse gives itself away to the wind, heart by heart-shaped seed. Instead, I forage. I make friends with the excessive and out of place, this unkempt garden, my life, these weeds. A weed is excessive, too good for its own or anyone else's good, virtuosic in its reach and fecundity. It exceeds expectations, an overachiever. It surprises and perplexes when so little was asked of it. A weed is out of place. It cannot say how it got here to this lonely spot. To say it is pilgrimed here would suppose intention and a singular trip carried out in one body to one place. Rather, this travel has been going on endlessly across generations, a nomadic life. One day, out of places, here. As I write this, my 73-year-old mother, who's been visiting us for a month due to waning health, is outside vigorously single-mindedly, furiously hacking at weeds coming up between the flagstones of our front walk. For her, there is no question of order and its need, of the immorality of weeds or the need for their excision. Some things must not be allowed to rise up. Though she is resolute, I can't tell anymore if my life is choked with weeds or nothing but them. Whether to make a reckoning of it means clearing a little space of legibility or taking field notes on the little and the many that populate this space, this semblance, this life. I cannot tell except by telling. I forage this little life from here and there, violet leaves from the lawn, sumac seeds from the highway shoulder, wild grapes off the chain link fence. I dry summer's linden flowers for the winter. I dig up and casket shovel killer dock roots in alcohol, reinterred in my basement as medicine for the future. I ferment cloves of garlic in honey, preserving one and transforming both. I do all these things because I want to remember that the little and the useless are what knit the visible world together. Remember that there is no such thing as absence, only ache. I do this haphazardly, without efficiency or logic. Scrape the root to the bright core to stain this blank page. Scry meaning from the resulting patterns, worrying the contours between memory and fantasy and oblivion. Assemble bones into a body I've never seen before. Lay seeds where its heart might be. And so I'm gonna now skip to that second section. So those were some excerpts from the opening piece, which is in a way kind of an overture that kind of gives you a sense of what the whole book is about throughout. I'm going to skip now to a section called Fathers Figured. And the essay that I'm going to read from excerpts is called Substitutions 1, A House of Swinging Doors, This Future Life, Calvatia Gigantea. And Calvatia Gigantea, as you'll hear, is the Latin name for a fungus, a mushroom called the giant puffball, which maybe you've encountered at some point in your life in the woods. And it opens with an epigraph from Basho, as translated by John Cage. What leaf? What mushroom? And I really encourage you to go on your own, go find the story of how John Cage came to translate that Basho poem. It's kind of an amazing story. So, what leaf? What mushroom? Basho. Amid the September leaf litter bronzed by the slanting afternoon light, a gleaming skull, round and clean, catches my eye. First one, then another further off the trail, and another smaller one like a child's. And over there is a white knob like a hip joint, unsocketed and emerging from the ground. Botanizers are the worst out here. You've got to unscrew those green eyes from their sockets and put them away. No more flowers or leaf shapes, advises John, my forest guide for this mushroom foraging class. We soft step through the leaf litter, scrutinizing every shadow, every tree stump and rotting log, every clump of leaves tilted up as if by some tiny earthquake. You've got to screw in your brown eyes and look for shades of brown and red, violet and orange, caps and shells and spheres. John and I are searching for mushrooms, like Virgil leading Dante through the dark woods and into the underworld, out of the green and gold of leaves spinning sugar from air and down into the forest duff, the mulch and mildew of moisture caught and webbed into the ground. Through the dark brown soil run thick, waxy white threads, individuals that merge into cords, cords that merge into mats, mats that grab hold of last year's fallen leaves, chew them into humus, and mold them into tilth. These mycelia are a headless, toothless, limbless, eyeless body, a body of all nerves or all blood vessels, a network body, a net, a mind. The mycelial mat of a fungus under the veneer of leaves in a forest is like the internet, according to the mycologist Paul Stamets. It pulses with information that is at once everywhere and nowhere. Headless, it thinks. Toothless, it eats. Sexless, it mounts its desire into the ether of air in fantastic architectures of gills and caps and pores. Birth. Two cells find each other. Two turning into one. Two turning into a third. Turning some notion of self into a scaffold for community. Community conjuring dreams of webs, congeries of roots and ganglia. A body. There are some 37 trillion cells in my body. Some are human and others are bacteria, viruses, fungi. Only 1 of 10 is mine, begging the question, am I theirs? Calvatia gigantea, the giant skull. At first, it's a spot of milk on the ground, then a golf ball, then a baby's soft skull, delicate and still knitting together. It grows over several days, monstrously. The skull's skin hardens into a dull mat, healing over the adolescent ruptures of too quick growth. Grown to its full majesty, immediately it descends into decay. The fine textured white interior coarsens, sickens into a dingy ochre chartreuse as its trillions of spores mature. The skin thins and brittles. The wind, weight, or an animal inevitably snaps the neck of this teetering skull and the contents tumble out. A graceful exhalation of ochre smoke into the quiet of the autumn forest. Calvo, bald in Spanish. To be bald is to be one step closer to one's skull, gleaming taut skin across hard bone. I think about my maternal uncles, most of whom are bald, as was my mother's father. And on my father's side, I have no idea if I even have uncles. Only smoke. Dead. The baldest one can be when even skin and blood are shed away and only unyielding bone remains. John, though I only knew him briefly, was a kind of father, a filament passing through me into smoke. He died of a heart attack 2 years after our foraging expedition. Not the heroic, tragic, ironic death by an ill-identified mushroom in one last fatal meal, but of a prosaic heart attack, the result of a plaquey artery or a misfiring muscle. He was too young to have died, but he was a large man who, though surprisingly nimble in the trailless forest, was an imposing, ponderous figure short of breath as he bent over tiny caps poking out from under dry, dead leaves. Without mouths or orifices of any kind, fungal hyphae exude powerful enzymes into the soil around them. They do the work of breaking material down into soluble component molecules that are then absorbed into the cells. Like an external stomach, though not like this at all, these enzymes form an aura of dissolution around the fungus, a liminal zone of other transforming into self, of self extending past itself in a halo of becoming. Do fungi have selves? Humans, of course, are more horrifying, given that we eat the living and keep our stomachs inside us like black holes of light that trap and transform the spirits of living things into ourselves. When I die, I want, though I will be past wanting, to be buried without a casket or shroud, naked, completely unadorned, and have a fruit tree planted above me, above that which is not me, so that its roots might plunge hungry into not my stomach, curious into not my brain, desirous into not my pelvis, thirsty into not my mouth. On a late autumn day, as golden light slants in across the dry grass, who can say where one begins and another ends? Who would want to? With each breeze, doors swing. Light roots the ground. Grass stitches the sky. It's been many years now since John passed away. His brown eyes have long gone white in the soil. What do they see now? Perhaps they squint at the sun, green gold now in the leaves at the very top of 100-foot oak. Or maybe they sift, transparent in the millions, from velvety gills into the forest eye, into the forest air. In my sleep, maybe they rolled out of the earth, unspooling white threads from their last home, crossed highways and valleys, and nuzzled their way past my eyelids into my sockets, so that now a waxy white cord runs from John to me, conducting like electricity a memory of a way of seeing. Two nodes of a network, one spirit flying from door to door. I'll just stop there.
Thank you, Marco. It's so beautiful. And you know, you started to read. You were excerpting and jumping around a little bit. I was following along, and you started to. I just like to read the first half of the paragraph that you started, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's totally fine.
Because it's to my uses. This is page 132. Under a microscope shifting focus, cells can appear like individual walled medieval cities, buzzing with activity contained by heavily fortified borders. Or with the turn of a knob, the walls all fall and leave a unified maze of interconnecting alleyways, a shimmering lace of movement, an open field. And this is the section you read. On a late autumn day, as golden light slants in across the dry grass, who can say where one begins and another ends? Who would want to? With each breeze, doors swing, light roots the ground, grass stitches the sky. And I scribbled in the margins heavily here at this section in particular, because it seems like such the perfect statement for what this book is. You know, from one angle, you might see it as walled medieval cities, you know, the various sections or chapters or essays and whatever you call them. And on the other hand, it's a sort of a completely open field, and there are sections you break into poetry in essays, and then some of the final chapters are what I see as open field poems. So as an opening question, having, you know, made a bad attempt at describing the complicated architecture of this book, I wonder if you could sort of tell us whether you conceived of a memoir this adventurous in terms of its structure, or was there no other way to write it for you?
Yeah, I definitely did not conceive of writing the book in this form. I didn't even conceive. I mean, this book came out of my own MFA experience, which was a low res MFA experience as well, because I came kind of late to the game, I thought I came at it on the heels of having been laid off as a farm manager for a nonprofit educational farm, I thought I was going to write a book about farming, about regenerative agriculture and permaculture. And instead, I found myself, as I was writing into some of the tensions, family tensions and intergenerational tensions that came with my decision way back when to kind of follow a life of plants. And as I did so, I thought I tried writing, a straightforward memoir. It came out in bits and pieces, and when I tried to put those bits and pieces together, um, the problem is that the problem I struggled with for a long time, and it's one of the things that I hope the book sort of makes a kind of like an intervention into, I guess, is um, I struggled with how to tell a true story because I had been a nonfiction MFA student. So I felt sort of like honor bound or whatever, like I felt like I had been slotted into that. Um, how to tell a true story about a life in which, one, I didn't have access to most of the facts, like it, like you had said, and like I had also said, my life was defined. It has been defined by having been raised not only without a father physically, but without a father sort of existentially. And so, how to write a story that's true when facts were withheld. Uh, and then the second concern was how to tell a story where I sort of felt like nothing happened. Like, well, how do you tell a story of nothing happening? I guess, Waiting for Godot is a great example, but and so, but really it's that primary concern of like, I don't know the truth. So how am I supposed to tell it to you? And the best way I could figure out to do that was to tell it to you in fragments that are kind of non sequiturs in some cases, that don't seem to add up to much. At least that's how I feel about my life. It doesn't really add up to much. And just eventually, very late in the process of writing the book, I kind of figured out for myself, like, it doesn't need to add up. In fact, if I am going to tell a nonfiction narrative, then the truest kind of nonfiction I can tell you is one that doesn't try to paper over or elide or manufacture some sort of grand unifying architecture, but just allows weeds to be weeds, right? Allows the land of my life, of my kind of personal history, to simply kind of sprout as it wants to, and not to cultivate it in a overly sort of refined and proper sort of manner.
That's great, and I think you're being humble, but the book adds up to an extraordinary amount, and I think the mushroom chapter really seems significant for me in that regard, because the implicit argument there, right, is that under the surface these plants are connected by this mycelia, this rhizome that we can't see, right? And it's powerful because the weeds are kept separate, right, in these chapters that don't butt up against each other, and are there's the father material in between, and then suddenly there's a certain maturity that I feel in this chapter in particular. Perhaps it's because it's such a it's a meditation on death, and a memento, sort of, I see it as sort of a memento mori, and you feel it's about the father substitute, as you say, but there's a beautiful portrait of your mother in passing, in which she's now in her 70s and come to stay with you, and you sort of see her in a new light, or I do there, from maybe a more adult perspective, and meditative perspective. And I guess the question I'm heading towards here is, this mater, this is very much about your mother, and how did work all these fragments, stitching them together, how did it make you see your mother in the way she raised you, in a new light?
Yeah, this project was one, obviously sort of one of anger, hence the name of the book,
Hmm.
um, but also a kind of, I mean, I think of it as an homage and um, a kind of coming to terms. I mean, I think you're right in that the mushroom essay that I just read from, like, comes very late in the book, and a lot of the kind of struggle isn't present there anymore. It's kind of just sort of like um released, or at least for the moment. um but uh what was I just going to say? It's definitely, I would hope that it would be read as both both filled with anger, which it is, but also one that is attempting to, so um I have done what I've probably in her eyes committed the cardinal sin, which is to just talk about things.
Hmm.
Um, and yet for me, that is the highest sort of honor I can offer, right? Like, how can I tell except by telling? There's another there's another place, there's another moment where I talk about how this book is in some ways, um, there's a chapter, the matter chapter in here, kind of revolves around kind of Christian iconography and kind of mythology or cosmology, however you want to say it. And there's a moment in there where I say that this book is in fact a kind of crucifixion, like
Hmm.
that I recognize that I am, simply by telling this story, enacting a kind of crucifixion of her, like that this is torture. Um, I don't know. Uh, I don't know if this book is ethical or not, like in terms of nonfiction. I hope um, I hope that readers find in it an even-handed and kind of mature reckoning that is filled with as much love as anger. But I guess I would leave that to readers.
I mean, I think it's full of love, and through and through, and just it's the attention it gives to family and to the minutia of the natural world, to weeds. So I find it quite tender, and not as angry as maybe I don't think it's as angry. It doesn't feel as angry to the reader as it may to you.
Yeah,
Um,
good.
but and I just to get back to the idea of um, having scant material, or sort of telling a story that may not be true, as you mentioned. One thing I was really interested in was the sort of refrain that occurs along the way. Let's see if I can find. I've got the quote here. If I can find it in my notes. Ah, you've got it all wrong. This is not how it happened at all. At first, in the chapters, this sort of intrudes as the voice of various family members, your mother, maybe the voice that you're hearing, the narrator's hearing, questioning the scenes, the vignettes, the memories. Later on, as the book evolves, that refrain begins to to change shape and actually kind of break down or reform, so that it disperses, becomes this all happened, kind of broken up in an
Mm,
open field way on the page. And so we sort of see and you wrestling with what is truth, right, over the course of the book. And I wonder if you could just say a little bit more about that refrain, if I may call it
yeah,
that, and
yeah,
how it
yeah,
changed shape, and how your thinking about truth in memoir, in the context of memoir, did change.
yeah. Yeah, it's definitely, I think refrain is exactly kind of how I would probably describe it too. Um, it in terms of writing the book, it came very late in the process. The book was more or less written as is. At least the main chapters or sections were these sort of mother sections where the refrain appears. But I really struggled with the ethics of this book, as I was sort of describing before. Like, you know, this book tries to open up space in nonfiction, in my nonfiction practice anyway, open up space for the not necessarily true, kind of imagined truths, misperceived truths, you know, embroidered fantasy as a way of suturing together kind of the like lacunae of a life, and sort of make space for that. And so I struggled because that's mostly all I have. That's what I've got to work with, you know. And so so I struggled with, well, what does it mean for me to kind of write this stuff down when I don't know if I don't know how much of it is true or not. And I know even the stuff I know to be true, I know that people will take issue with. And I struggled with that for a really long time until I finally just had this simple sort of epiphany of like, well, let me let those voices in. And so that's where in that first section you get, you know, you've got it all wrong. This is not how any of this happened. My mother says, my father says, my grandparents say, all the ghosts say, like just sort of imagining all of the different voices, all of the different constituencies that would take issue with what I'm writing. And then once I had that, I just sort of imagined, well, what happens if you take away the particularity of those voices and just let that phrase hang in the air, as just sort of like a constant sort of a constant nagging sort of phantom in like in the house of nonfiction, like
That's well
and
put.
and then you know, by the end, in the final of these 3 chapters where this appears, yeah, it's laid out exactly as it's appeared before, but without attribution, and then it's an erasure. You know, some of the words are removed so that all you end up with is this all happened. And for me, that just feels like, you know, my voice finally can say, you know, like owning, like, no, this is my experience, right? Like it might not be someone else's experience, but it's my experience and I'm laying claim to it. And laying claim to an idea for nonfiction that that fantasy and like oblivion. There's that phrase you read early in at some point. I think this phrase, between memory and fantasy and oblivion. Right. That memory, yes, right. We accept memory as part of nonfiction, but I think fantasy and oblivion are also part of it. And so for me, that's sort of what that last sort of erased version is sort of pointing to.
Yeah, that's you know, it's something that's fun to track, the way the thinking about truth sort of builds confidence, but in a tentative way, right? And in a relative way. So it's not an imposition of thought on the reader. It's just suggestive, and it's part of the coming of age story that's a part of the book. I guess I'd love to just maybe take a step back and hear about how you hit upon weeds in particular as the prism through which you were going to sort of filter all this family and personal history. Was it you started an essay on one particular weed and the family intruded, or was it something else? How did you then decide to go to the next weed and talk about your mother there too?
Yeah. So it started by me just sort of unearthing memories and just sort of writing down childhood memories. And one memory I had, which didn't make it into the book actually, uh, was of being in Cub Scouts. And after school, like once a week, we'd go over to my friend's house. His mother was the den mother of our Cub Scout group or troop, whatever it's called. And after we were done with our, Cub Scout activities, we'd go out in his backyard and we'd play. And there was a kind of a fort under some bushes that we would hang out in. And there would always be some sort of outsider. There'd always be someone who'd be kind of like have to be kept out of the fort. And I remember us taking clusters of burdock burrs from around in the field and making these big balls out of them and throwing them at the person who, was like to be kept out, the person who was on the outs. And so I wrote about that. And then I just sort of started to realize like, oh, like a burr is like this thing that catches onto you to try to catch a ride, to like disperse seeds. It's a seed dispersal mechanism. And then I started thinking about how in my childhood, I was an only child, but I was one of three cousins. And the other two appear in the book as well, my cousin Elsa and my cousin Andre. And I was the youngest of them. So I just started to remember how much throughout my childhood I was like that burr, trying to catch a ride on my older cousin's sort of coattails and always being the pest. Like I was Elsa's 6 years older than me and Andre's 4 years older than me. So they were old enough so that I was always like the little kid underfoot and always the one that wasn't wanted around. And then from there, I just started to realize how much that same feeling kind of permeated my whole childhood because of the circumstances of my childhood. So I started to write. Burdock was the first of these chapters to get written out of that sort of process. And then from there, I started thinking, well, gosh, what about other weeds? Like, could I organize? Are there other weeds that could be emblematic of other kind of moments in my life? And there were the weed madder and shepherd's purse seemed to define different moments in my life of kind of matters, produces a red dye. So the idea of kind of staining or kind of covering over things. And then shepherd's purse has seeds that are in the shape of little hearts. And it's a common weed that's kind of cosmopolitan. It's everywhere. So the idea of travel and the idea of heart and kind of sexuality and yearning sort of seem to make sense there. So yeah, that's how I came to kind of unfurl that weed metaphor conceit.
That's so cool. And one of the I have to say, reading this book, I was kind of amazed because I had not here in LeGrand, but where I lived previously in Haley, Idaho, I had all of these weeds in my backyard.
Yeah,
And burdock,
sure.
it's those terrible birds would get caught in my dog's tail. And interestingly, I knew them by different names in a few cases. But
interesting.
and I want to talk about names and the sort of your play with names and common names, Latin names, your family's names in the book, if we have time. But one of the things that another sort of interesting argument that the book seems to make is that since these weeds are found everywhere, right, in other people's backyards, that maybe, right, there's this kind of complexity of personal experience to some extent, right, in every backyard. And there's a sort of the ubiquity, the universality that you talk about. Really made me think about how we all have, well, if we all sit back and think about writing a memoir, it's sort of like, well, maybe not a lot happened, but once you get into it, right, there's all this drama behind the scenes, maybe more so than in other cases, but I think you can find it. I wanted to, kind of, there's so many directions to go, but in thinking about maybe just how you built these fragmented, layered lyrical essays, did you said you were writing in fragments, did you then very intentionally sort of, did you intentionally sort of write about your mother in one thread and then layer in a thread about the weed and then find yourself shuffling? Can you just talk a little bit about your process of arrangement and finding those associative connections from fragment to fragment?
It was a lot of shuffling. Yeah. It wasn't, I would give myself permission to, like, not try to chain things together or link them very intentionally all the time in the process of writing. Like, so, okay, I can't think of anything to write. Well, let me just write about the process by which pollen um,
Hmm.
uh, uh, fertilizes uh, uh, a flower, right? A style, and how seeds get formed. And let me not worry about, like, what that's going to do with anything else, or let me write about. So I used to, among the places that I gardened as a horticulturist, was the Cloisters, which is a medieval art museum in New York City, part of the Met. And they have a series of open air courtyard gardens that I used to help take care of. And part of that job involved reading a lot of kind of medieval folklore, and documentation behind the plants that we grew. And so, I might, at another point, I might be like, I don't know what I'm writing about, but let me write about, um, folklore around bed straw and the birth of Christ. And let's just, like, see what happens. Um, and then, the mind is a metaphor making machine, right? Like, it wants to leap beyond or carry beyond, to some other place. And so, like, either I would write something about myself and then it would make me think, oh, maybe that could connect with plants, or I would write about plants and I would suddenly have a memory and I would, oh yeah, okay. And then also, like, this was years in the making and a lot of shuffling. And so even a linkage that might have happened in the moment of writing might have been unlinked and kind of shuffled around into other places later on. I mean, basically, I'm saying it was haphazard and haphazard at best. I mean, I'm not trying to, like, make light of it or whatever. Like, there was a lot of thought that went into it, but I couldn't reconstruct it for you exactly. You know what I will say, actually, which goes back to something you were saying earlier. One of the other strands in the book is about foraging, right? So I wrote it. I read from the mushroom foraging section. There's another section that is a series of sort of lists of rules for foraging other plants,
Mhm.
and I sort of I sort of took that foraging practice that I have in my life and sort of thought about my writing that way. I'm gleaning, I'm foraging for things, and then after the fact, I'll figure out how to make use of them. You know what I mean? Like, yeah.
Yeah, that's great. I was going to ask you about, sort of your distinction between gardening and foraging. And on page one, you say, I don't really garden as much anymore in light of the profusion of weeds that have come into my life. Instead, I forage, and I think you just spoke to that in a really interesting way. Another sort of metaphor, weedy metaphor, that botanical metaphor that I found myself thinking a lot is, I think, a word you've already used tonight, which is dispersion. And the idea of, you talk about, you figured yourself as kind of a weed, a burr catching a ride. And you also describe your mother as a bird too, right, in terms of her immigration to the US. And so we get this sort of like transnational, transgenerational story of dispersion. And as the book kind of accelerates, right, we see your dispersion from what you call the stress of a too small world in your place in Rhode Island. And you figure them, or you describe them as these forays, and they get larger and larger. First like into the neighborhood that you had not explored, and then to New York City, and then to upstate New York where you worked on a farm, and then into different things like Buddhism and therapy. And then finally internationally, right? You describe these big tours that you went on that we see a widening of world for you. But what the question I was getting at is that you describe them, you label them as pilgrimages, which I thought was fascinating, because on the first page you say that it would be maybe too much to call a weed dispersal as a kind of pilgrimage, and then you do it, right? So again, we see sort of like a building of confidence. There's sort of a tenderness to your story, your interpretation of your own story there that I admired. Could you talk more about the idea of dispersion and how that intersects with pilgrimage for you?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's amazing to have readers, like, because like I never made that connection between that the word pilgrim in the opening and then the fact that I keep using it, like, but that's really interesting. I mean, I guess I'm trying to point to a kind of, it's sort of the same dynamic as the distinction between cultivating and foraging, right? Like, I don't want to cultivate anymore if it means that I have to negate the existence of the weeds that don't fit somehow. Growing up, growing up as a child in the 80s, now I'm dating myself, but like growing up as a child in the 80s, like I remember hearing the word regularly, the term illegitimate child regularly, and like nothing is illegitimate. I mean, that's I guess what I'm trying to say. And like I would rather forage than cultivate. And so and in terms of this sort of idea of dispersal or travel or wandering, I'd rather think of wandering. Pilgrimage sounds like cultivation, like it's like going towards a stated goal. But the pilgrimage that I do in this book, that the things that I call pilgrimage, are these wanderings, right? Like, so I guess I'm trying to collapse the dichotomy and just advocate for considering wandering or aimlessness as pilgrimage. I wasn't thinking about it at the time, but now that I'm talking, like, it makes me think of Thoreau. I can't remember what essay it's in, where he talks about sauntering and the kind of etymology of the word saunter, which turns out not to really be true from what I understand, but like the idea that saunter comes from santer, from like the Holy Land and pilgrimage, or what is the other, santer, like without land. But I kind of like that, the idea of like the pilgrimage is a sauntering, which is a kind of a wandering, right? Which is a kind of foraging, which is a kind of acknowledgement of weeds, of the validity of these things we call weeds.
That's great. It's the book is just so complicated, right? There's so many ways that it sort of reads against itself, and that's what makes it really, really fertile. And one, the metaphor of the seed and generations is really apropos and complex in light of sort of your description of coming out as a gay man over the course of the book. Your mother feeling like the news that you were gay meant it was the end of, she would have no grandchildren, right? That's something that you come back to several times in the book. And I found that very interesting in terms of how you align yourself with weeds, right? Which are so generative, like so forceful. and yet there's society, telling you, you're not, you're inutil. Sorry if I butchered the
Okay. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
pronunciation there, but
You too. Yeah.
and so is that when did you sort of, if I'm not making too much of it, that is that something you're trying to cultivate, that kind of, that complexity? Is that something you saw emerge in the writing and then ran with?
That's an interesting sort of paradox that I honestly I can't claim to have like intentionally sort of put in there, but um uh yeah, so coming out meant first and foremost, like and this tells you a lot about sort of my relationship with my mom or like our kind of the yeah, my upbringing. um uh Coming out as gay meant something for her, not for me. Like and I guess I think of weeds. Yes, weeds are generative, and so you could ally them with a kind of a heteronormative sort of birth the babies sort of um, discourse. Uh, but um, but I guess I think of them as queer. I think of um, all of the people and experiences that have been sort of ripped out um, from their native space and thrown away in various ways.
Mhm.
And to me, that seems, um, you know, making an argument for those for those plants to remain and for those bodies to remain where they are, seems like a kind of a queer thing to do. Yeah.
Yeah, and I hope my description wasn't too
No,
heteronormative.
no, no. Yeah.
I do think you were sort of claiming weeds as queer, and I would absolutely agree with that, and that's what I think is quite fascinating about the book, and deeply powerful. I want to get to, if we have just a couple. I've gone on a little long, but we've got some questions from the audience
Yeah,
that I'd love
sure.
to get to. One from Christopher Densmore. Did you investigate the intersections of queer theory and ecology leading into the work on this book? Meaning, I guess, did you come at that? How intentionally did you come at it, or did it?
Yeah. I can't say that I sort of dove deep into the world of queer theory per se in the writing of the book, but I did in my college years. For those of you who kind of know the kind of the world of queer theory, I went to NYU as an undergrad, and I had the really great fortune and privilege, and I didn't recognize how lucky I was to get to take a graduate course with Jose Munoz, queer theory course with him. And so that's been sort of a guiding light in my life since college. Um, I mean, I guess it just goes back to this idea of the validity of every experience, right? The validity of every existence. And to me, that feels like a very queer gesture to make in the realm of sexuality, to not to move away from binaries and move away from normative identities, no matter how uh, move away from a dynamic where we widen a circle of acceptability or respectability or normativity, and just get rid of the circle altogether and just allow a kind of, to go back to kind of the term used, Nick, a kind of an open field
Mm.
of experience. And to me, that's how I would see the intersection of queer theory and what I'm trying to do in the book, and using kind of themes of foraging and weeds to sort of get at that. And also, I want to say also flipping that metaphor. There is a long-standing and troubling and maybe inescapable dynamic in the world of nature writing of turning nature into a mirror for the human, and holding nature up as a metaphor by which to discuss human experience. And of course, that's definitely what's happening in my book. I'm not going to say it's not, but I also hope that a reader uses my life, the human, as a mirror, or not as a mirror maybe, but as like a window through which to understand the natural world in a different way. That the kind of if you would have a problem with calling me an illegitimate child, then I would hope that rebounds backward or back into the natural world, and one could see the natural world and in an ecological world of relationship that in which nothing is sort of out of place.
That's beautifully put. I mean, it's such a tender portrait of weeds, through and through, and immensely complex. We've run our hour, but I want to just ask, just sort of quickly, what you are working on next. Do you have more botany related books in you, more memoirs? What are you diving into now?
I do, I think. I've got essays that have been published but didn't make it into this book, and others that aren't published, that I think will make a collection, a kind of a more standard sort of a nature essay collection or ecological practice sort of collection. I still hope to kind of trouble that idea of the nature essay, but anyway, more of an essay collection as opposed to a memoir. And then I have an embryo of an idea for a kind of a sequel to this book. But that's very embryonic, and
we won't make you say anything.
Yeah, don't hold me to it.
But also can't wait for it. Let me just hold up the book again. This is Matter, a Memoir in Weeds by Marco Wilkinson. It's really just a terrific, complex book that it bears lots of rereading and is sort of serendipitous, delightful, and hard-hitting through and through. So, Marco, it's been a total pleasure to chat with you. Thanks for dealing with my wandering questions.
No, it's been an amazing conversation. Thank you for being such an amazing reader of the book. You've taught me about what.
Well, I can't wait to teach this in my next environmental writing class. I think this is really cutting edge and doing a lot for the field. So thank you, and
thank you.
Keep it up, and we'll hope to see you soon. Thank you, audience, for being here tonight with us, and thank you to Devon for being in the background, our tech guru. We appreciate you. Yeah. Marco, thank you.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.